has never been just a game. History tells us these fields, courts, and victories have never been colorblind.
The director of the American Indian Movement met with Braves officials and asked them to change the team's name.
Or devoid of politics.
You think he's got what it takes?
I hope so.
I thought we were on our way, we're changing things for women, and I wanted that to continue.
And we know this story didn't start by taking a knee.
Now, this has nothing to do with race. I never said anything about race.
So for me, there was a little bit of ignorance and learning. It was a huge learning curve.
This month, we're going to peel back the layers.
Because he had a little measly NBA contract. I'm not a part of the generations of struggle.
Tonight is part 3.
My perception of it is just a little bit different because I tend to see the race in all of it.
We're sitting down with former athletes from across the state.
When you boil it down, it's guys with a common goal, right? And you got to be accountable to one another.
Yes, we're tackling race, but we're also going to talk about the fight for gender equality.
Really, guys? Yeah. Men, you can't, there's not enough profits to go around.
My name is Jenna Hanchard. I'll be asking the questions, but I'm no expert. My hope is that we can all learn something from these conversations on race and sports.
I saw the plates, I was like, wow, that's
there's actual food coming.
Is it gluten-free?
What about the carrot?
Oh yeah, I can have a carrot. That's not gluten. No, we ain't got no free.
Okay.
Everything costs.
No, we don't have any glue either, so.
Is there extra pressure, you think, for athletes of color that, you know, if you made it, you should just kind of shut up and play? And you shouldn't complain?
People have this, I think, around sports, it's like you ascend to a certain level, right? And then it's like, oh, everything is good. You know, we got 70,000 people cheering for you or booing you or whatever. Like everything else before that is, you know, and then everything after should be a certain way too. Like, and it's not that way at all. And I've had people tell me, oh, that, like, what do you know about that? Like, your dad played in the NBA. I'm like, okay, my dad played in the NBA. I'm sitting in the living room with my mother that went to jail at 13 years old for my rights. And because he had a little measly NBA contract, I'm not a part of the generations of struggle that my family has been through. But that's an attitude that's like, oh, you made $1 million, like you've arrived, and the PTSD and all of the things that happen from the traumatic situations in your community and oftentimes at hands of the United States government, that's gone because you got an NFL contract.
I always felt like anytime I walked into a room, I wanted to be the smartest person in the room. But it wasn't cool to be smart and have other thoughts around other things when you're a professional athlete. And so, you know, if you did venture out into something, like they would be, even the team would be like, oh, like maybe he's not dedicated to football, so maybe we should, you know, it's like, oh, because I'm exercising this other part of my brain means that I'm not, you know, still invested in what I'm doing here. And so then that kind of mentality kind of like dumbs you down a little bit.
And you think that for athletes of color, that's in particularly tough?
I think it's I think it's for both.
Yeah.
But because of the things that some of the African American players are interested in, then it becomes a problem because they're the protests and what you're protesting for. And then, like Donald said, it's like, well, how can you complain? Like, you've made all this money. It's like, well, then what am I supposed to do? To just stop caring about everyone else or not think about the feelings? You know,
isn't it both though, right? Because there's pressure on one side. You have people. I mean, everybody hears that, like, just be quiet and play, right? I mean, you hear that a lot in society. But then there's also pressure, like, hey, you have a platform, right? So you need to, you know, stand up for issues and things like that. So you get guys to that level, and you've got kind of a group of people telling you, hey, we don't want to hear it, and you have another group of people who are really expecting you to kind of lead, and so you're in that zone. That's got to be tough to deal with.
You know, I played in the 90s, and you know, at University of Washington. I won't say it wasn't post-racial. I mean, certainly there were white women on the team, black women on the team, Asian women on the team, but you know, we didn't really have any racial undertones that at least I felt.
At Wazoo, may not have been the same thing. I mean, you're in a small town atmosphere, and I know for me coming out of South Dakota to Colorado, I hadn't experienced much culture, much race. So for me, there was a little bit of ignorance and learning. It was a huge learning curve. I had to learn, and I know that my teammates that were black definitely learned a lot about me, just from the conversations we had, the arguments we had pertaining to race.
Yeah.
I would say my history with it is a little different. I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm
Younger than you.
Yeah. I judged this dude's high school dunk contest. But you know, I grew up in North Carolina, up in the mountains, and our school was the only, if you want to call it, city school in the area. So we had probably about 30% of our school was African American or people of color. I've gone into stadiums, you know, as a basketball player, and we go in the locker room, and they have dudes hanging from nooses, or like, you know, we beat them, and there's a sign in the thing that says "go home," you know, and so then you have to get on the bus. You're on the bus, like ducking down, they're throwing stuff at the bus, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so my perception of it is just a little bit different because I tend to see the race in all of it. But it is just a reflection of what society. You can't have one without the other.
You know, I don't want to, you know, make light and or have anyone think that I don't think there's racial tensions amongst college teams. I think that maybe I should have said, if you're willing to do the work. Maybe my team during my, you know, time, my 4 years, the women that I played with that came before me and came right after, we were all willing to do the work regardless because of that common thread. So we're willing to take that common thread and really weave it into a rich, you know, relationship. If you're not willing to do the work, you will have that experience where you're just lining up and you're just standing next to or practicing with, and then you go on into your other life outside of that locker room. But I feel like hopefully people are really willing to do the work. I mean,
what
because
did that look like, I guess, in your experience for the people that were willing to do the work? How did you all break down those barriers of bias and racism?
I mean, I think, you know, I can remember there was a teammate of mine who we are good friends now. Our kids play against each other. She is not a person of color, and she, you know, said something that was offensive. It just came out of her mouth one day. We were stretching in practice, and she just said it.
What'd she say?
Well, I won't say because then she'll know, and then, you know, everybody will know. But
she gonna know.
You know, she already know. She, you know, she made a comment about the odor that would come from just the black girls on the team, and we were stretching, and boy, I mean, it was like the scratch the record, and everybody was saying, and I was like, wait, what? Wait, what'd you say? You know, and at that moment, there were, you know, women of color who were clearly offended. I was one of them. There were, you know, white women who were offended, like, hey, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And we could have, at that moment, just said, hey, we're good. You know, it took us to both say, I'm not going to cut you out. I'm not going to shut off and just say that's what I think, and we're not going to ostracize her, because really the numbers don't, for a basketball team, the numbers don't support that. Right. You know, you're really only as strong as the weakest link on your team.
We all have done and said dumb stuff.
Ooh. Yes.
But when you do and say dumb stuff in an intimate environment, you can work beyond that.
You sure can.
Right? Now you do something dumb, somebody catches it on camera, and you will never live it down.
Yeah, it's over.
And but it's how we grow. You know what I mean? Like, it's how we grow. If she was in the locker room and she said something like that, and the teammate was filming it, and they posted it, she would have had to move out to UW.
Right.
Out the city.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, that's unfortunate for our kids.
Yeah.
You know, it's an unfortunate part because you like, I've done dumb stuff.
Well,
and I've had the opportunity to grow.
There's no buffer, right? You had to call, you had to pick up the phone. It took 3 hours at least for it to get outside of, you know, now, it's viral.
It creates a situation where you have a reason to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? Like, it gives you a purpose, right? It's like, where this guy might say something to me, and if I didn't know him, like, we would have a real issue right now. But we got to go out here and try to get a win. You know what I mean? So we gonna like, hold up, bro. Let's figure this one out. You know what I mean? Like, so we can go do what we have to do. And if in society, if we could take that part from sports, right? If we could take that, like, we have a common goal in humanity to, you know, do. So, like, let's let's not let this stop us. And then from that, from exposure, from time, you end up growing to love. When you're on a team, like I don't have no teammates that I prefer over any other teammates because of their background. Like it's just like the kind of person you are that I get down with, or it's the kind of person that you aren't. But we still can get like, you're still my teammate, right?
The power of sport, though, right? You take a Super Bowl championship, right? There's not too many guys. I don't know if there's been a guy who's going to say, you know what, I'm walking away from this team, walking away from opportunity to win this championship because I don't like this guy, right? That goal supersedes your bias. So you're forced to stay in that situation and work through some of that. And whatever the goal may be, it may be a state championship, it may be just different things. So that's the thing that doesn't exist in society. A lot of times we don't have that goal that's going to keep us there to get to know people.
And as a result, you grow as a person.
But do you think that actually changes the person, or does it help them win the championship?
See, that's what I was going to say. Like, you tend to compartmentalize it, right? Because that's a safety, that's a place of where you can be safe. The locker room gives you that kind of safe space to kind of exercise some things out. But it doesn't always go from the locker room to the home. You know what I'm saying? So you can have one way that you're operating in the locker room, and then it's a total code switch when you get out. When I walk into a football locker room, like usually it's separated by position, but it's also separated by race too. You can see the line right down the middle, white, black, and then everyone's just kind of doing their thing. When it's time to play, we come together and we have this one thing that we're fighting for. But I've had to play beside dudes that have told me, like, I don't want my sister to date a black guy, stuff like that. But I have to play right beside this dude. If sport is going to impact a person in a way that it totally changes them, then they have to also do a lot of work around their perceptions of things outside of sports.
I mean, I guess to your point, it kind of takes work, right? I mean, you were saying you had to put in work to kind of shed some of your biases and build it. What was that like for you?
I have a grandfather from the South, so he had his biases. I have my family in South Dakota, they have their biases, and that's what built me. But I knew a lot of their perspective wasn't right. And so I had to learn and build my own. And with sports, I had so many people surrounding me that were different and that were confident in who they were, and because of their sport and because of what their upbringing was. And so it was able to teach me to learn to respect that.
I did want to talk about just some of the disparities, the gender disparities within sports. And I know, especially for women's basketball, y'all aren't paid the same amount. I see your face. Can we talk about some of those? What does some of those look like?
When you look at the revenue from the NBA and you think, okay, as a woman, you're looking for equality. We're out practicing, doing the same thing. We're out practicing, working hard, lifting weights, doing the same thing that the men are doing.
You're gonna say more.
More.
I mean, the girls work harder than my boys for sure.
They're going overseas to play in the
12 months a year.
Yeah, I mean, I played for 3 months, and then in order to keep yourself in shape, you go overseas, and you want to make more money. Here, I was making the league minimum, which was $26,632 or something like that. And I'm 45 years old, so this was 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. I mean, that's just not a lot of money. Taxes and health insurance. I mean, I remember looking at, they come in to talk to you about, investments and health insurance and I'm like, do I have to pay these?
You have to afford to train on top of it?
I mean, it doesn't make fiscal sense, to be honest. And so it's really hard for a woman who is making, even now, if there's a woman on the team making league minimum, you're not living on that. I mean, think about Seattle. You got to be making $80,000 a year as a single person living in a one-bedroom apartment in this city. So you're way off in terms of being able to have a livable wage. But you're on television, you're working every day, and you're sacrificing your body. And so when you think about the equality and the profit sharing, it's like, you can't really, guys, men, you can't. There's not enough profits to go around to trickle some, down to the women's league. I mean, there's just so many concessions that as women we're already walking into, we're already giving that the salary piece, not to have caught up to, you know, I mean, Breonna Stewart was the MVP of the WNBA, and I think she got paid less than $100,000 or just over. There was an article in the paper about how little she was paid, and this woman is as good a basketball player as I've ever seen. Yeah. Ever.
My son, we had this conversation, he's like, well, there's just like no demand for it. I'm like, that's because they don't try to drive the demand.
That's right.
I'm like, I said, if you look at sports TV right now, everyone has to have two dudes that argue, right? And it's just like Stephen A. Smith and somebody else, or you know, Shannon Sharp, and it's like they drove the demand for that. Because no one really wants to like wake up every morning and hear people arguing all the time. But they kept putting it in front of you. They kept putting it in front of you in a way that where you thought like, well, that's sports TV now. Right. So if your sports channel doesn't have some two dudes that are arguing, then you're going to have bad ratings. So if you can create a market for that nonsense, you can certainly create a market for some of the best basketball players in the world that play, you know, great basketball and run plays, you know, and have skills and work hard and play defense. And it's like, and so that's where
run plays like that.
It's like this right here. Just like let's see if I can.
Actually see screens set back door, play forming, and the ratings are bad for the WNBA because they have us on TNT or BET or some off channel for the most part at 1 in the afternoon when people are working, or on Sunday at a time that, you know, it's not convenient for people to watch it. And, you know, this year, for instance, the women's playoffs, the WNBA playoffs, was some of the best basketball I have literally ever watched. Couple that with the exciting finish for the women's Final Four. I mean, just some of the best women's basketball I literally have ever seen.
He's like, you just seen Sue went rolling on. So he was, I was like, yo, what's going on?
But it was.
They hit Sue in the nose. Sue got up. She was. I was like,
it was organic. It was classic. It was everything that basketball, women or men, are supposed to be. I mean, Sue and Diana Taurasi they're just hitting threes and scoring and hitting off. I mean, it was just some of the most exciting basketball I have ever seen. You wouldn't have known that if you weren't a basketball player or have followed women's basketball. You wouldn't have known it. They just didn't cover it. And I mean, even locally, it wasn't really covered very well at all.
When they were playing.
And it was the place to be. I remember, you know, during the finals, everybody was like, I'm going to the game. You going to the game? Can you get tickets to the game? I mean, it was super exciting. But to your point, the media is just not publicizing it, and they're not pushing it the way they're pushing Worldwide Series of Poker. And maybe it's a brain sport. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, like.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Any final thoughts you guys have?
Nah.
About race, sports, gender?
For me, I mean, it's cool to be here, be in this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. I didn't know I would see friends when I got here. I didn't know who was on the roster. It's really cool that, you know, we've talked about getting together and talking about things for a while. So thanks for bringing us together. Thanks for doing this for the community.
I think it's still a work in progress, and hopefully the next generation of athletes coming, you know, behind us are thinking that the work is worth being done. It's important for the work to be done.
And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, is to have these types of conversations, sports, race, culture, gender, you know, the whole thing. And so I really appreciate being invited and being a part of it.
Y'all want to look more?
Yeah.